All right, so let's get started. Um, Today, for our organic commercial fruit production strategies for the Midwest series, we're going to be talking about organic certification. And joining us, we have Dan Fillius. He is the field specialist for commercial vegetable and specialty crops here in Iowa. So Dan is the statewide field specialist with Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. Before joining Extension, he grew organic vegetables for 14 years, including stints managing the Michigan State University Student Organic Farm and 140 acres of vegetables at the Featherstone Farm. So everyone, let's turn it over to Dan. And my name is Suzanne, by the way, and I will be fielding questions at the end. So thanks, Dan. All yours.
All right. Thank you for having me, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here, and you should be seeing my PowerPoint slideshow there. If I could hear a verbal, like, okay, that's
We're
what you
good.
see. Okay, great. Organic certification for fruit crops. If you want to email me, of course, there's my email address, and I'm also on Instagram and Facebook there. But it's honestly, as Suzanne said, my position is more vegetables and specialty crops. We have a fruit field specialist also at Iowa State who is very knowledgeable about fruit, but I have the experience of being a certified organic farmer for many, many, many years. So I'm here to talk through that experience more than the nitty gritty about fruit production organically. You'll hear about that in many more talks in this series. This is just laying the groundwork for getting organic certified. And so that handle that was up there for Instagram before at Iowa Veg Pro Support is mostly vegetable production content. So maybe you're not interested in it. As Suzanne mentioned, I was a veggie farm manager, organic veggie farm manager. I mentioned it too. This is at the 140-acre farm, and here's some other pictures. This is at Michigan State University. Mostly vegetables, some fruit. You can see some alley crop production in the background here of this slide, where we had vegetables amongst some organic fruit trees. And oops, good grief. And we did a lot of high-till production there too. 140 acres of vegetables. And at that large vegetable farm, we also had 3 acres of organic strawberries. So tiny, tiny bit of fruit production, but I definitely a lot of experience with organic certification. So I got to say thank you, because I am largely a vegetable guy. I made a few calls to some certifiers that I worked with, OFA out of Ohio and MOSA in Viroqua, Wisconsin. I called both of them, talked to the technical assistance folks to just make sure I wasn't speaking out of turns about some of these fruit things. So thanks to them. Thanks to Suzanne Slack for talking with me a little bit about that. And also Chris McGuire, some of you may know, at Blue Roof Orchard in Wisconsin. I chatted with Chris a bit to get some perspective on how fruit may differ from vegetables. And the answer is not much. So, but I at least now have some good examples to illustrate my talk with. So in general, you're a commercial grower, you're either looking to transition into your existing orchard into organic, or you're somebody looking to start with organic fruit production. Then what the National Organic Program requires is a lot of stuff, this whole list, and I'm not going to read it all, but in general, it's using certain things. It's not never spraying, it's just using certain sprays. Conserving natural resources, which includes soil, water, natural habitats, using approved planting stocks, maintaining buffers to protect the organic integrity of your space from non-organic spaces, keeping records to support all of this as well. And we'll talk more about this in general. You'll notice there is an asterisk on this one: control weeds without herbicides. Weed control is going to be covered in a future talk, but the asterisk is there just to note that there are organically approved herbicides, but they are very few, only a couple of them. And they are broad spectrum. And I don't know very many people who are using them for a large scale weed control in production, but there are organic herbicides. So first off, excuse me one sec. First off, finding a certifier is super important. Not every certifier on here is currently accepting new farms. I know that, for instance, the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship, IDALS, they only certify a certain number of farms. And so in order for a new farm to come on, an old farm has to leave. So call up, find a certifier in your area, one that you are that you enjoy working with. I know MOSA is one that I worked with, and I enjoyed that they had a lot of forms on their website that I could just download and use. I found it was a handy interface. Other ones have a really responsive, phone interface for growers. So just find one that you like to work with and start with them, and then ask them all sorts of questions. A number of people are asking me or asking the internet, can I use this thing on my organic farm? Well, the answer is not all certifiers will answer the question the same way. In a perfect world, they would. The National Organic Program lists certain things that can be used and cannot be used, or sorry, excuse me. The National Organic Program lays out what makes a certified organic farm, and all the certifiers are meeting those, living up to, making sure farms are adhering to those standards. But there are some things that can differ depending on if you call this certifier or that certifier. Also, there are a couple lists of supplies, of sprays, of things that are to be applied to farms. You might have heard of things being OMRI listed, OMRI, and Wisconsin State Department of Ag also maintains a list. Sorry, Washington State Department of Ag, not Wisconsin, not DATCAP, are maintaining lists, separate lists of materials that are okay, like this pesticide is OMRI listed. It means it adheres to NOP, but not every certifier has every OMRI listed product in their database and can say, yeah, go ahead, use it. Sometimes you need to ask, does this OMRI thing comply with my certification through you? It's important. So having a good relationship with your certifier is important so that you can make sure that you're not applying something that is not okay. So find a certifier for whom communication is good with you and work with them, because these types of I would make sometimes calls on a weekly basis to my certifier to make sure that something was allowable. And it would be 5-minute call at the most, but it was important. Some examples of calls that I made. We were looking to do strawberry plug production. We wanted to, rather than buy bare root plants and plant them in the ground, we wanted to buy plugs to plant later in the summer. And when I was certified with OFA, they said, no, you could not, because the conventional media, they were not available organically, is a little bit of backstory there. The conventional media and fertilizer that was used in the plugs, they said that would decertify the land that you put it in. However, when I moved farms and was certified through MOSA allowed it. And so you're going to find different answers depending on the certifier you call. And it's their interpretation of the rule that leads to that difference. Currants and gooseberries, Chris McGuire at Blue Roof Orchard gave me an example that also certified with MOSA, that he had ordered bare root currants and gooseberries, but they came as plugs unexpectedly. And so he called the certifier to make sure that would be okay, because they were not organically produced. And that was something that they allowed in that moment. So be in touch with your certifier, have that active dialogue. So let's say you have been producing not organically, there are ways to transition. So when you're transitioning an orchard into organic, a planting, if the land has been, let's say you're a conventional producer, the land has not been grown on with organic management, that land takes 3 years of organic management before that land is now certified organic. For plants, planting stock that is not organic, let's say you have organic land already, or land that is coming out of a pasture that didn't have non-allowable substances put into it. Not those non-organic plants, because organic plants are kind of hard to come by. Not a non-organic plant placed in that ground that is certifiable only will take 1 year of organic management before the products, the produce that comes off it, the fruits that come off of it, can be called organic. So 3 years for the land, but 1 year of organic management for those non-organic planting stock. Some examples of this, some people, when they're just starting an orchard, they find that, it might be more economical to feed with soluble N in the first few years to get established crops, and then after that, 3 years of management once those plants are established. Another example would be weed management. Some people find it more economical to do weed management with herbicides at the beginning and then 3 years of transition afterwards. However, this another option is weed fabric in this case. Some people will just use that, and that's allowable. But then there is still that collar of dirt that is around the tree that would require some hand management there or other management. Excuse me. Monitoring soil fertility is something that is required under NOP to make sure that you are applying fertilizers at adequate rates, but not over fertilizing to the point of running off. So soil testing is important. This is done in annual vegetables very, very regularly. It's something that we do on an annual basis. It's not required on an annual basis. You could do it every few years and adjust accordingly with that. Some substances that we were prohibited from applying include muriate of potash. We had to apply sulfate of potash instead. Again, there's lists with OMRI and WSDA, but call your certifier to make sure that what you are trying to put on is allowable. Another example, we would sometimes encounter soils that were too high in pH, and we would apply sulfur pastilles to the ground. And there's this brand called Tiger Sol, and there's an organic formulation and a non-organic formulation. The organic one, the binding agent that holds the little sulfur pastille together, is allowable, and in the non-organic one, it is not allowable. So it's sometimes as simple as that. Like the material itself is fine, but what holds it together isn't. Another example is peat moss or potting media can have certain wetting agents in them to keep them moist, and the organic ones use a wetting agent that's derived from yucca, I believe, and the non-organic ones do not. So a couple examples there. Compost is something that can be used, and that is defined in the organic program. I'm going to dig into that on the next slide. And then if you're using manure, typically there's this thing called the 90-120 day rule. So the 90-120 day rule is 90 days before crops are harvested that are up off the ground, and 120 days before crops that are on or in the ground. Most of these fruit crops are up off the ground, so manure would be applied no closer than 90 days before harvest to comply. So compost, it is defined, and there's a couple ways that it is defined. One is a commonly seen one where you're making a pile, you're turning it 5 times within 15 days, keeping temperature records to make sure that or using a thermometer to make sure it's 131 degrees or more Fahrenheit, and then keeping records to prove that, or to show the certifier when they come, the inspector when they come. And then another one is using like a blower fan of some sort to force air into a pile that you've made. And that can take as little as 3 days, 131 degrees. And also you need to keep records. Now, not every input needs to be composted. This is only manure that really needs to be composted. And if it's Manure, again, if it's not composted, follow that 90/120 day rule. If you are not using manure, but you're still piling it up into a pile and turning it, but it's all vegetable matter, leaves, uh, uh, vegetable scraps or apple scraps or other fruit scraps, vegetative matter, you don't need to call it compost. We found that as a certified organic farm, when we had kept these piles and we were just putting vegetative waste into it and maintaining it and then spreading it on our fields, our certifier called us on it. They were like, wait a second, you didn't follow the days of application rule. You harvested way faster than 90 days on that crop. And we said, well, it wasn't vet manure. And they said, oh, well, in that case, call it mulch, because that they assumed that compost had to be composted for safety purposes. But and for that matter, if you're buying in compost, you need to have records of the time, turn, temperature rule. And not all municipal composters, that's one place people get it compost from. Not all of them are following that or keeping those records. Again, are they putting manure into their compost, or is it just the yard waste that people are bringing from their homes? Whatever it is, remember, call your certifier, because it's they may or may not. I have heard a couple different certifiers opinions on using municipal waste. Some are twitchy around potential herbicide carryover that could be in that. Some are totally fine with it. So again, call your certifier. I mentioned water testing. There is annual testing required for post-harvest water quality, things that you're washing produce with, rinsing produce with. Water that's used to rinse produce must be potable. And that's if you're using non-municipal water. This qualifier here, this non-municipal water, because municipal water, rural water, city water, this is tested by the water authority, and you can obtain tests from them. You don't have to test it yourself necessarily. It's treated water. It's you don't need to test it yourself. So I mentioned earlier that it's hard sometimes to find organic planting stock. Those strawberry plugs that I talked about, there once was a greenhouse that was producing organic strawberry plugs. They no longer do that, and so a lot of people are getting it from a place like McNitt in gosh, are they in Indiana or Illinois? They're in one of those states, and they are selling to a number of different growers. But let's talk about other things besides strawberries. So trees. Chris McGuire offered the observation that they've ordered from a number of different nurseries, that none of which had organic trees. And one of the things that is prohibited is the grafting compound that is on these trees, where the graft union is. And a lot of certifiers say that wax or that compound makes it non-organic planting stock and requires a 1-year transition. So even if you had organic, root and scion, by putting that compound on there, it makes it non-organic planting stock. Is this really an issue? Because it's only a 1-year transition. Are you going to be getting fruit from that plant within that 1 year anyway? Probably not. And so not a big issue there. But that it is what it is at this point. And there's what the NOP rule in italics there at the bottom here. This is what the rule actually states, that I'm just paraphrasing. Trellis materials. Again, call your certifier. Most that I've talked to say no treated wood at all. Most of the specialists that I spoke with said it's not possible to transition over treated stakes. However, I have heard, verbally, that some certifiers, maybe in Pennsylvania, might allow you to encase a treated post in something like plastic, and so it's not contacting the ground, and therefore contacting the roots of the tree as it grows around that might be allowable for that certifier. But the ones that I've talked to out here in the Midwest have not been allowing that. So they are asking people to use either black locust or cedar or some other rot-resistant wood, but a lot of people are just going with metal posts. There are some plastic ones, but I'm not so convinced about those. Of course, I'm again not an expert at this. So I've heard of the use of concrete posts. Also, I know metal's a common, and there'll be more talk about this, I'm sure, in future talks. For pest and disease management, paint, like in this picture, not allowable. It's a synthetic, and of course that's a fringe, like as far as pests and diseases, right? That's not exactly something you're spraying on to prevent an insect pest, but for say codling moth, orchardist I knew in Michigan, Jim Cohn, was running pigs through the orchard at a certain time to keep down the insect populations to eat those drops, and so there are what is required before spraying in the organic program is that you try physical and cultural techniques first. And if those are not adequate, then moving on to another thing. An example that, and there's a lot of approved or OMRI approved or organically approved pesticides that can be used. Some are say they're approved with restrictions. In the vegetable world, we would spray copper sulfate onto tomatoes to prevent late blight. And that was one that, you had to show that you've done the different practices and also provide a soil test to show that you didn't have too much copper in your soil, that spraying a copper fungicide would add more copper and create copper toxicity. So these are some of the restrictions. And I'm not sure about this example, but Chris McGuire said that Maddex granulosus virus for codling moth is one that is approved with restrictions. I'm not sure about the restrictions on that one. Another one, or an allowable example of mating disruption, which is common, is isomate CM Flex, another example from Chris McGuire, but not all mating disruptors are allowable. And so check with your certifier about these things. Fruit thinning, lots of different ways. Protone, Chris thought was not super effective. There's liquid lime sulfur, these potassium bicarbonate products that are not, this is an example of ones that are not expressly mentioned or listed for fruit thinning, but they have been shown, some people have found them to be effective, and so they are spraying them explicitly for prevention of scab or cedar apple rust, but can also potentially in some ways be used for fruit thinning. Hand thinning, though, it can be very labor intensive, and so this is why people are trying these other things out for making sure that they're not having to spend all that money on labor. There is Chris, I got tuned into Chris recently because just last week he sent out an email to a couple listservs I'm on with this YouTube video that he had or about a SARE project that he had just engaged in at his farm last year and in previous years about the pollen tube growth model, which involves spraying regalia and another compound that I can't remember off the top of my head on the blooms as they are just opening, so that you're killing off some of those flowers. And he said the results he found were not reliable, though there are other studies that show that they are reliable. But if you're interested in seeing that it's a 15-20 minute video. I thought it was really interesting to watch. Okay, so that's an overview of a lot of the different things that you might think about from a management perspective on your farm. But there is a fair bit of paperwork that goes into becoming organically certified. And so starting to fill that out well ahead of the time that you want to actually be certified is super important. So I started a farm here in the Des Moines metro area, and we knew we wanted to be selling crops in the summer that were certified. So I started filling out that paperwork the winter before and submitting it to the certifier so that they would have it on hand. They could tell me what I was missing, and then we could get the inspection scheduled for before the first day I wanted to start selling certified organic produce. So making sure you're doing all that ahead of time is super important. One of those things is the organic system plan. This is an overview of your farm. It asks you a number of different questions, 163 of them in Mosa's case. It's 20 pages long. You fill that out, you send it into them, and then you supplement with a number of other things. But this is just a description of your farm. What's your rotation practices? More, of course, that's more applicable for an annual vegetable farm than it is for an orchard or some of the perennial fruit crop. But these are some of the things they ask. How are you making sure that fertilizer isn't running off? Things like that. The qualitative things. Some of the lists and things are in the future slides here. For instance, a 3-year field history is asked for. They want a field number. How many acres are on it? Do you rent it or own it? What's its organic status? And what crop are you putting in there? And what inputs and amounts are you putting in? And the dates that you put that stuff in. This is, you are forecasting this really here. And keeping records, updating them. And a prior land use declaration. This is if you are bringing a field in to certification and it was and it's coming in from somebody else. So we rented a lot of fields at one of the farms. We would ask the owner of that field to sign this, to fill out this form to say how they had managed it, to demonstrate that they had not applied any substances that were not allowable. Or if they had, write the date. Some of those fields are coming out of conventional soybeans. And so they wrote the date in the middle of the summer, the year before that had been sprayed. Then we would transition it. And then 3 years after that date was the date that we could start selling certified organic produce from there. And note here, this says alfalfa was planted on this land and is still in production. And this January of 2011 date is mentioned because that's the date that GMO alfalfa came on board. And so if alfalfa was planted after that date, they have to show that it was not GMO alfalfa because genetically modified organisms are not allowable. That would be a not allowable input. Sorry. This functions basically if there's no there's like an affidavit. So people just say, yeah, the last 3 years nothing's been done on this land. That also has functioned for me, but this is a more formal use of it. A crop summary is what has been on the fields, and this talks about how many acres of each crop and how many organic acres you have. This is used quite a lot. This would not fit all the annual vegetables that I made, but this would be really good for an oats or field crop style report. And this is mainly used, these are organic acres and projected yields, as part of the support of organic integrity, which I'll get into in a little bit. This idea that a split operation where people have conventional crop and organic crop, making sure that they're only selling the organic crop as organic and not somehow commingling and beefing up their organic numbers by mixing in some. So there's a big push to make sure that doesn't happen in the organic inspection process. One sec. So you've got your land, you've identified how it was used, and now you need to make sure that document that the crop you're putting into there is organic or not organic, and just say and document that somehow. If you are using non-organic planting stock, you need to document that you have looked 3 places for that planting stock looked for it to in an organic way, okay, I want, I'll give an example of those strawberries. I want Chandler strawberry plugs, and I want them to be in plugs rather than in bare root. And I need to just show that I've looked at 3 producers of strawberry plugs and show that they are not available organically in any of those 3 before I can buy the non-organic option. Same thing would be for other plant materials and seeds. And so you list the crop type and variety here, and your 3 sources. It doesn't have to be 3 unique sources. If you've got 3 catalogs that you swear by and that you like to work with, you can just make sure that those 3 are your 3 in all those cases. And the date contact would be like the catalog date, and show that it's organic, unavailable in either the appropriate quality, quantity, or form. And then like the form would be plugs of Chandler strawberries rather than bare root. Quality would be, your judgment there. And quantity would be, it's not available. It's only in a tiny little amount rather than a large amount that I need. And you can also, or you must also, if you want a certain variety that has certain characteristics, I know this is something that many vegetable growers find. There's like a pepper variety that they really love, and it produces, out the wazoo, orange bell peppers, but it's not available organically. So they can grow that. It just can't be a treated seed, and they need to explain that, it's just the best orange bell pepper variety out there, and so that's why I grow it. So that's important in this organic search. In a seed table, this would be, say it's, this could be also the, it's not just seeds, but it's called the seed table. Like notice that there's seed, like planting stock seedlings as a form here. You'd list your crop, the variety, where you got it, whether it was organic or not. If it was treated, think about seeds here. Let's talk about maybe like you're seeding down white clover in pathways between, say, trees. That white clover cannot be treated. And also the inoculant is something that sometimes trips up a lot of people. It can't be inoculated with a non-allowable inoculant. And so there are certain inoculants that are only allowed, there are certain inoculants that are allowable, and most others are not allowable for organics. So sometimes going down to the local elevator or, to get a bag of clover or a bag of seed is not viable because it doesn't have the right inoculant on it. You could, by spreading the wrong clover that has a non-allowable inoculant, you could decertify that land for 3 years. So it is something to watch out for. I'll give an example of that inoculant. Like that was one thing where I called a grower. I called my certifier, and we were about to spread this this legume out, and it had the wrong inoculant on it. So I had to delay, and I had to order the certified inoculant. And it just another example where calling the certifier really paid off in that situation. Input inventory, this is like where you list out all the potential sprays or things that you want to apply to your operation. And some advice from Chris McGuire was that he was told by the certifier he works with that to leave everything on the list that he might want to use. And so his list is about 50 items long, and it's more of a headache if you to take something off that you might still have sitting on the shelf that you want to use, because then if you use it and it's not on your input list, you have to go through all the headaches of getting it back on your list and maybe answer questions from your certifier about why are you spraying this thing that we didn't approve or wasn't on your list. So make sure just leave things on there to give yourself more flexibility. I mentioned buying in compost, but also buying in manure can be, it has to be documented because of the potential for bedding to come with that manure that might have non-allowable things in it. So we had, I remember when I was doing this once, I had to call there. I knew that the bedding was good to go, but I had to call the manufacturer of the bedding and get their like signature on it to say that they got it from this certain sawmill and it was only untreated. It was not. It didn't have any glues from like particle board or stuff like that in it. So this is or it was the lime that was used in the barn approvable. This is can be that may be the biggest hurdle that I had to go through, the most onerous process that I had to go through, but it's important. Cleaning logs are for equipment. If you are sharing equipment between an organic part of your operation and a conventional one, or you and a neighbor, you're borrowing a tool or equipment from a neighbor who is not organic, making sure that it is cleaned so that no dirt, non-certified dirt from their operation is ending up in transferred from the disc, say, into your field. That is important. Now it's nobody's out there with a fine tooth comb making sure every little speck of dirt is off. It's just showing that you looked it over, made sure that it was clean before you are using it. In some cases, we would do this, and we would take a hose and we'd hose it off. Other times, we'd look at it and it was totally free of any particles of dirt or clods, and we just would take it into the field. But documenting that you are looking that over is important. I mentioned traceability earlier, and this is part of the annual inspection. I'll talk about our vegetables, but I'm sure you can think of this for fruit as well. We had some crops that we would buy in that were not certified organic, and then we would resell those. We had to maintain a separate section in our cooler that was labeled for non-organic. And we had to document all this so that it was clear that we weren't selling that non-organic stuff as organic. And the same is true for if you've got the organic gala apples over here and the non-organic galas over here, and you are harvesting both of them. When the inspector comes annually to look at your farm, one of the things that they will do is they'll pick a random crop and they'll say, okay, this year we're going to look at gala apples, and show me your harvest log, show me all the things, show me your planting, your fertilizing, your sprays, everything you've done with galas, including your harvest logs. Okay, it says here you harvested 5,000 pounds of gala apples. And now I see that you sold 4,800 pounds. Great. I see you harvested, or that would be fine. But if you harvested 5,000 and sold 6,000, you would need to answer how that happened. Some other things to note that are other some other paperwork that I didn't feel like I need to go into right now is they ask for some new things that are being asked are based on the strengthening organic enforcement. It's a new part of National Organic Program to prevent that non-organic stuff being sold as organic or contamination happening. It's mostly on the distribution side, but farms are asked to fill out a fraud prevention plan, which is a quick 2-pager asking about certain questions about how you are avoiding fraud on your farm like that. And another thing to note is that obviously there's a lot of records here. And that's why I like doing it in the winter, not in the summertime when I'm harvesting veggies. Maybe the flow on your farm is different, but finding a quiet time to do it is important. But FSMA, Food Safety Modernization Act, can be onerous with records, and a lot of these organic records can double for FSMA. So think about if you're trying to comply with both, figure out how many of these records you can just stack and use the same record for both things. I mentioned the annual inspection and how they talk about traceability with you. It also is a visual inspection of the whole farm. It's usually a ride along. The inspector would come in the truck with me, and we'd go look at all the perimeters, look at the buffers to make sure that my fields were 25 feet at least set back from the neighbor. And we'd look at all the list of the organic systems plan, that like qualitative thing I mentioned at the beginning. And it was generally speaking about a half a day to a full day, depending on the farm I was on. All right, that's my last slide, but I will mention something that I was just thinking about there is the some farms I've known who maintain deer fences around the perimeter, and weed control underneath that fence is difficult organically. And so some people I've seen have a greater buffer from their fence, and they don't certify that land underneath the fence, and they have used herbicide to maintain weeds underneath that fence. This was, we rented land from the horticulture farm at Michigan State for our organic farm, and we had no say about how they managed the deer fence. So they were doing that, and we just had an additional setback from that, so that we would from the fence, so that we could maintain the integrity of the land, because you're certifying the land that these crops are grown on, and then maintaining that certification by not applying things to the crops that are on that land that would decertify that land or that crop. So think about, you're not just certifying the crop, you're certifying the soil and the land that crop is on. All right, so that's what I've got right there. I'm going to stop sharing. But if you want, that's my email address. You can feel free to email me. And what questions do you have?
Thanks, Dan, for the questions. Before we get into questions, we have a survey to do. So if you wouldn't mind just doing this little poll real quick for us, it should just pop up, and then we'll let Dan answer questions.
Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. All right. Suzanne, I'm curious. Oh yeah, Adam, I see you just unmuted.
No, sorry, wrong button.
No, no worries. Ask me a question, Adam. Come on. Suzanne, I'm curious, what with your experience on an organic fruit farm, is there any does my portrayal of an organic inspection jive with your experience of an organic inspection, or the paperwork? Is there anything that you saw that differently?
No, it's pretty normal.
Okay.
I didn't see anything different. I think you I feel like they're a lot more stressful than you let on. Sometimes I feel
oh my gosh. Yeah, good point. Good point. I'm talking about it like it's, yeah, like I maybe glossed over that. That was one of the most stressful days on the farm, was like the organic inspectors coming, and it's scheduled ahead of time. At least for me, it was. I think there are now like some non-scheduled brief check-ins that they do, that inspectors will do, but they weren't like asking to do the whole inspection. But yeah, it was one of the most stressful days, and that big big sigh of relief when it was over, for sure. Yeah.
The other thing too is oh, sorry.
Oh,
To
I
make it
see.
a little less stressful, whenever I was an extension specialist, like a county one for a little
Mhm.
while, and I used to go with the grower whenever they were getting
Mhm.
inspected. And
Mhm.
you can ask your county or your specialists to do that if you'd like. I haven't done it here in Iowa, but when I was in Virginia, I did it quite a bit just
Yeah,
to help out.
yeah. And there's a question about about cost of certification being scaled to size of production. Um, yes, yes is the answer to that. And there are there is a ceiling also for that, but then there's also programs like cost share programs that can that can ease that cost for a lot of growers. I don't know the 100% like the cost for every single one of them. Different organizations will charge different amounts, but yeah, another reason to call a certifier and call around, see what works for you. Are there options available for nano commercial operations, like real tiny commercial operations? Eric, now are you talking about would a certifier is there a different cost structure for those nano operations, or like would a place even certify a nano operation?
Yeah. The question actually has to do with, I'm not planning on scaling up from the 120 trees I've got now,
Sure.
but that's hardly worth, going through the hassle of the paperwork plus whatever expenses might be involved. I just wondered if there's a category that might
Oh,
allow for us nano guys to do it.
well, if you don't think organic is, you can manage your orchard organically without being certified organic, if that's where your values guide you and you just don't feel like the money is worth it. I know a lot of vegetable farms that are very small that are opting not to get certified because they have a personal relationship with almost all their customers who they can explain that their growing practices to, and they don't find it's a marketing benefit. It really does start to become a benefit, it seems to me, for operations that are a little like one step removed from their customers and need to just have that label speak for all those conversations, like, yes, certified organic, that and people are like, oh yeah, I know what that means, even if they don't, but they and that's an assurance. So some people who are smaller in size are opting to go with an organization called Certified Naturally Grown. I know they certify vegetables. Suzanne, do they certify fruit as well?
Which one was it?
Certified Naturally Grown.
I'm not familiar.
Not
No.
familiar? Okay, well, you might look into it. It's basically organic certified with saying there's a few differences in allowable inputs, but not many, not large differences. And a difference that the smaller growers that I work with like about it is that the inspector is taken from a pool of other certified naturally grown farmers. And so it's sort of like you're not placed with your best friend who's just going to automatically like rubber stamp your stuff, but it's they find that it's they like, I don't know, they just like that experience better. The inspector, I should mention, for the organic certification inspection is not an employee of that certifier. They're an independent contractor who is hired by that certifier, and the inspector could work for many different agencies. And so you sometimes will get a repeat inspector, but other times I've worked with, probably 8, 9, 10 different inspectors over the years as they come to the farm. And so got a
Excellent.
little,
Thank you,
yeah,
Dan. That's great.
yeah, you're welcome.
Feel free to unmute yourself if you have any other questions for Dan. Okay, well, I think that will wrap it up. And thanks again, Dan, for joining us. That was really interesting. I definitely learned some stuff. And I hope everyone else did too. So
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
yep, thanks. And for everyone else, we have other webinars in this series. Josie put a link in the chat if you're interested. And here's our upcoming ones on weed, insect, and disease management, and then following it up with marketing for organic fruit.
Take care, y'all.